everybody. It is a delight for Dale and I to be welcoming you to the inaugural Lenoir Rhyne University MFA Literary Salon. This is a brand new program, and we have delighted in going through our friends and colleagues who are writers and storytellers around the world and selected some that I'm sure you will find very inspiring and supporting of your own creative life. So I want to thank Dr. Jennifer Heller, our Dean of the College of Fine Arts and Communications, and Dr. Jennifer Burris, our Provost here at Lenoir Rhyne University, for helping us make this happen. Our future speakers will be, just so you know, February 9th, Mildred Berea, a poet from Uganda who lives in Asheville now. On February 23rd, Nathan Ballingrud, who is an esteemed writer of horror that is so beautiful and mind gouging, you won't know what hit you. March 16, Michael Knight, an award-winning fiction writer. March 30th, Cornelius Eady, who just read the poem Proof at Governor Mamdani's inauguration in Manhattan. And he was asked to do that after we had booked him to be one of our guests here in the MFA Literary Salon. And finally, Kelly Link on April 13. I will now introduce with great joy, as you can tell from my beaming smile, Alastair McIntosh. Alastair McIntosh is a Quaker, an honorary senior research fellow and professor in the College of Social Sciences at the University of Glasgow. He is a fellow of the Center of Human Ecology and was the first professor of human ecology at the University of Strathclyde, and has also held honorary fellowships at the Academy of Irish Cultural Heritages at University of Ulster, the School of Divinity, University of Edinburgh, and the Schumacher Society. Alastair grew up and was educated on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, together with 4 years in the 1970s and 80s working with appropriate technology in Papua New Guinea. His background gave him a grounding that has shaped his life's work. This work has focused on land reform, community empowerment, and the psychology and even spirituality of the wider human condition. Lenoir Rhyne narrative healthcare and MFA students have read his books with wonder at how enjoyable they are, even as they succinctly carve a path forward through every cause for panic and strife. In Riders on the Storm, he presents the very real science of climate crisis, followed by realistic, cost-free solutions that we return to this basket of community, where creativity holds us in ceaseless presence of community and the divine. He recalls this for us in Poacher's Pilgrimage, his memoir of having launched the land renewal movement in Scotland by staving off a multinational mining corporation with songs, poetry, gardening, and gathering on the Isle of Egg detailed in Soil and Soul. He has addressed NATO with a talk entitled God, War, and the Fairies, broadcasts meditations and insights weekly on BBC, publishes in the British Military Standard Textbook, Ethics, Law, and Military Operations. The UK Defence Academy presented him with a silver paper knife with the engraved words, "For broadening our horizons." He serves the Gall Trust with his heart and soul, providing a place for Glasgow's poorest community members to find friendship and warmth. And if you're lucky, like me, a very old song sung in Gaelic by a man beset with real-life challenges and yet a glowing Gaelic heart. Throughout his work, we are reminded that anyone of Irish, Scottish, European, and many other descents were once and are all still Gaels, entrusted with the cultural memory that wove the world with healing and stories for 850 years before the Crusades. And to Gaels, no one is a stranger. At a time of fear and aggression, humans have long turned inward to the heart and outward to one another, so weaving what Alastair terms the basket of community. This evening, He weaves us into this global basket of his listeners and readers, spanning from Papua New Guinea to Iona to Asheville, carrying with him the message of Celtic Christianity as it thrives in concert with the world's traditions. I cannot think of a more timely guest to our basket than my friend and teacher, Alastair McIntosh. Welcome, Alastair.
Thank you so much, Laura. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you. I do encourage you, if you're in a context where you're comfortable so to do, to leave your cameras on, because it's so much nicer looking at real people in real places. I see that Toddler Vassar is there. Laura told me I could share the link with a few friends, and Todd is one of my former students who teaches at a college. I'm not sure whether he's in Singapore just now or whether he's in South Carolina, but Todd, if you're you feel free to put the camera on so that you can see what people look like after they've come out of one of my courses. My theme tonight, folks, is depth and discernment in the writing that we do. And in speaking of depths, I want to draw especially on a Scottish cultural context of the carrying stream. The sense that we are not alone in what we do, but we are part of something bigger. And that we are in error if we think that this is me and my piece of writing, or even we and our piece of writing, if we want to reach into depths, because depths comes from an understanding that, as Nora Bateson, the daughter of Gregory Bateson, who wrote Steps to an Ecology of Mind, put it when we shared a platform some years ago in Glasgow, as she put it, we may not realize what it is that we are inside of. I said to Laura that I had some difficulty deciding how to approach this topic tonight because my mind was in such a different place than a formal lecture. My mind has been deep down in the fairy hill all day, in the source of that carrying stream. And before you switch off and think that this is bonkers, I'll just give you an idea of the kind of books that I've got working with today. This is the Carrying Stream Flows On, an anthology from the School of Scottish Studies, marking, 50 years of it or something like that. Diamond Jubilee, whichever one that is. But notice there the legitimation given to the notion of the carrying stream, an old folk phrase that the folklorist Jamie Henderson gave new meaning when he used it as a metaphor for the folklore process itself. His statements, the politics follows the culture, and poetry becomes people. Expand the concept to include all. For Hamish, folklore was never a now academic discipline, but, quote, the proper study of mankind, end quote. A truly human phenomenon that can provide a fulcrum for all modern humanist studies. Now, I'm not here to talk about folklore, except if we are talking about the creative realm, if we're talking about the imaginal realm, if we're talking about, as Henri Corbin, the French, perhaps leading 20th century expert on Sufi Islam, called it. If we're talking about being alone with the alone, we're talking about those moments of creative work, whereas Corbin puts it, creativity is prayer. If we're talking about that depth of being, we're going to fall open at the right page. Oh, here it is, here it is. A God who is the creation of our imagination can only be unreal. A God that is the creation of our imagination can only be unreal. And so there'd be no purpose in praying to such a God. For it is precisely because he, or let us also say she, is a creation of the imagination, that we pray to him and that he exists. Prayer is the highest form, the supreme act of the creative imagination. And he goes on to talk about divine compassion and how God prays for us. Now, I dived in slightly deep there, but I would say that I am working with. So that's a book from Scottish Literary Studies on Christianity in Scottish literature, in which I've got a chapter that Laura can share with you if it would be of interest on the three forms of mentoring that I'll be speaking about tonight. I'm deeply engaged in this just now because I'm reviewing this very unassuming looking book, Donald and His Seven Cows, which is about an old man from an island next to the one I grew up in, and how every day he'd go out with his 7 cows. I've known many people like that. Many people like that have mentored me. I know the poet Angus Peter Campbell, who has written this book, and it's a very profound spiritual study of the indigenous cosmology, both the Catholic religion of that part of the world and also the fairy tale. And I'm reviewing that for the journal Theology in Scotland from St Andrews University Divinity School. In the course of doing that, lest again you think I'm bonkers, I'm drawing on books, so I don't have it down here, but another book of that size by the same author, books of getting on for 1,000 pages, on the Gaelic otherworld, on that realm of fairy. This is Ronald Black's study of 20th century Gaelic poetry. Also edited by my friend Michael Newton, the Gaelic scholar. Some of you might know of him. Do check him out online if you don't, and the courses he runs. His anthology of a late friend, John McIntosh, who is considered to be the greatest living cultural scholar of Gaelic tradition until he died about 4 years ago, in which he's talking about the realm of fairy as being a metaphor for the imagination, out of which, quote, the creative power of mankind emerges. To get what I'm trying to get on about here, I'm trying to get on about a realm of being, a realm of depth within our own psyches, in which we come into contact with something greater than ourselves. That's John Carey, professor of medieval studies at the University of Cork, an American scholar, Single Ray of the Sun, with his chapter The Ecology of Miracles and the Baptism of the Gods, in which we come to see in the early medieval Irish text the realm of fairy, that realm of magic, that silver pathway that you might walk on in the creative world, is not a devilish visitation, but a divine visitation, as is quoting from an early Irish medieval text. It was the angel that came to their assistance, for they, that is to say, the fairies, were faithful to the truth of nature, for the precept of the law was served by them. And Carey comments, here in closing, we have a still more audacious defense of the deities of the old religion, unique as far as I know in the literature. They are guardian angels, the messengers of God. The pagan Irish, and you could say also Hebridean, it's culturally the same, we are to understand, were not devil-written or deluded, but they were faithful to the truth of nature. And it is with this truth of nature and its place in Irish thought is the next chapter, the ecology of miracles. So I'm asking you to take this very seriously. We're talking about nothing less than an ecology of miracles. We're talking about exegesis of the tradition that some of our greatest scholars in the Celtic tradition have opened up to us. And we're talking about the capacity to see realities, to see patterns, to see meaning, and to articulate it in our writing that goes beyond normal literary writing. And that uses imagination, engages in imagination, but is not imaginary. Donald lives in a world where many would say he's away with the fairies. And yet, if I just open it where my pencil happened to be in here, and yet, you know, I watch the stars from bed. These are the Hope-Gill stars, and I wake up and stand and look out the window, and I can see the sea searching to the west. As a child, I was always told to close the west window at night because that's where the fairies came in. But I never closed it because I always wanted to see them. All the green and silver and white, whistling and singing, piping and dancing their way through the night. I was an only child, and they were my friends, able to do the things I wished to do someday, dancing and singing, stealing the goodness out of the milk just to annoy people. I could be a spark of light in the dark or a sprite at night. Best of all, we could probably play football forever without getting tired or having to do chores or being called home for tea. All I see now in the village are house lights blazing in the dark. Nobody in the modern village sleeps well. Everybody's up watching some machine or lying in bed awake worrying because they don't work hard enough, never go outside even for a walk. I don't see any of them all day long as I go about with my carry. I think they're afraid of being outside because they can't control it with a switch. John the 7th. I spoke there about discerning pattern. And before I move on to slides to show you more where I'm coming from, I want to quote from the Bird Passage collected longer poems of Kenneth White of Geopoetics. And some of you will know that Laura has anchored the Scottish Society, the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics into an American context, and so she'll tell you more about that if you're interested in those. Geopoetics, what Kenneth White spoke of as being a higher unity of geography and poetry. And I often use this when people ask me, what do you mean by discernment? At one level, I can give a quicker answer, that discernment is waiting on the movement of the Holy Spirit. It is waiting for God to come alive in us. At another level, and especially in academic work, I often quote the prelude here to his long poem, Walking the Coast, starting off, living as a boy on the shore, seeing and hearing the clouding and clamoring of gulls like overwhelming metaphors, or maybe a heron alone beside the sea, like a mind alone in the universe, etc. But the prelude which I want to read to you is a question they always have. Out of all the chances and changes, to select the features of the real significance, so as to make of the welfare a world that will last, and how to order the signs and the symbols so they will continue to form new patterns, developing into new harmonic wholes, to keep life alive in complexity and complicity with all of being. There is only poetry. Keep life alive in complexity and complicity with all of being, developing into new harmonic wholes, so they will continue in new patterns. There is only poetry. You see, what we're talking about here is a mode of creative engagement. that enters into very deep imagining, whether you call it Harry's dream, fairy, various Islamic terms of Kaaba, muses, drawing on the city tradition, or the Jungian collective unconscious. And therefore, you cannot do this kind of work unless you also engage with your own psyche. I don't mean in that conventional psychotherapeutic sense, although that may be part of it. I do mean spiritual beseeching. I do mean deeply asking if there is such a thing as God, if there is such a thing as a spiritual reality, the Goddess, Allah, Brahman, Buddha, nature, whatever, Christ within, whatever name you might want to give it. If there is such a thing, may I put my pen at service of it. May I put my life at service of it. Because only if you come alive to life, your own life, and the life around you, will you have anything worth writing about. Otherwise, what you write about will just be the pretty ditties of literary magazines, but do nothing to influence the world, do nothing in service other than self-service of the artist. So I'm concerned with writing that makes a difference. And at this juncture, I now want to share screen. Laura, please shout a wave madly to me if this doesn't work.
It's
Laura,
working.
So is that working? Okay.
Yes,
Are you
you
seeing,
got it.
Laura, are you seeing the whole screen, one slide, or are you also seeing on the side my slides that are about to come?
We are also seeing the slides down the left.
Okay, in that case, I'll change mode because I don't want to.
Yes.
Okay. So here's where I go.
There we go. Now we've got it.
Okay, that's the Isle of Lewis, as it's called in the north, or Isle of Powys in the south. The poet Angus Peter Campbell, I was just telling you about, he comes from South East, this island down here. He currently lives on Barra there. There's the Isle of Skye. There's Scotland. There's the Outer Hebrides in relation to Scotland. My father was a doctor in the community. My mother was English. That was when I was age 4. My sister was 3. When we first moved to Lewis, we had distant family connections there. But growing up, you're very much taken into the community. So here's my father, the young doctor in 1960, a Scotch. My mother, English. As you can see, quite something for her to come to out of a glamorous world in England into a context where we literally got our drinking water off the roof. So there's my father filling out watering cans to take into the house for drinking water. And that was a kind of context. Electricity had only been in the area for 10 years. As we grew up, we made friends. That's me and my sister. That's my friend, Alec George. These kind of friends, real people in real places that hang around. They're not like Facebook friends that you like and unlike. But if you look at me and Alex there we are a few years ago with another friend, Rusty Sonny McDonald, and our village behind it. And later I'll be talking about Donald Trump, whose ancestors came from this area. And Sonny there is a distant relative of Trump on the Smith side, as indeed many people in our village. And I want to say more about that later in describing my own work. Because if you look out across where I live, this was, these are the hills we used to hunt deer over, and that's Loch Skippercleat, where I spent many a day rowing the boat for salmon, fishes, when I was a boy. There you see the sea beyond, where we would go sea fishing. You maybe just make out our villages, North Lochs, in the background there. One of the things that might strike you is how empty it is, but there's a reason for that, if you tell those kind. I want to give you a sense of the community. In 1954, the great American photographer Paul Strand went to the Outer Hebrides and photographed the people. In the slides that follow, I'm going to match some of those images of the people, the kind of people I grew up with, his pictures are from the Southern Hebrides, mainly from South Wales. I'm from the north, in about 50 miles away, in the Isle of Lewis. But it's basically the same kind of people that I grew up amongst. But I've matched them with quotations from one of my students, Ian McKinnon, now a scholar from the Isle of Skye. You might have heard of his work because a lot of what he's done in recent years is open up the way in which slave traders and plantation owners in the Caribbean returned to Scotland, having been part of British imperial process, and used their ill-gotten gains to buy huge areas of Scotland from demoralized, dispirited Highland chiefs. That's another story. And set up sheep farms and evict the people from the land, about which I will say more shortly. So Ian is researching that, interviewing people in his community around about 2007, and people saying to him things like, and this is typical of what I grew up amongst, you absorb a lot from the landscape and an awful lot from the people you live with. You might not be aware of it at the time. You might even scorn it, but you are absorbed in it. People were so interdependent. I just accepted that. We lived for one another. We worked for one another. And we cared for one another. It's not romanticizing. This is my world, the world that is raised, and the world that we can move. Because what you are is your community. And if this really feels like something from an imaginary past, there's that little girl in 1954. There she is today, a mature woman living in the West of Scotland. We don't need to dig in our community to find people who carry these values, perhaps in very humble ways. As writers, we can draw out their stories, we can pass on their example. Ian said in his thesis, I feel there was a sense in which I am being reclaimed by my own from modernity. The deep, comfortable feelings of connection and love that I feel in the presence of these people is an urgent cosmic sickness. There you get the sense of calling. There you get a sense of calling to something that is greater than us. Being drawn into the carrying stream, that cultural stream of being. That in the Bible, in the vision of Ezekiel, is a stream that flows from underneath the threshold of the temple. And it's the same stream that appears again in the final chapter of the New Testament in Revelation, where it waters the trees on both sides of the river, not just on our own side, not just on the side of those who might vote Democrat, but also on the side of those who vote Republican, etc. Not just white people, also black people, not just men, also women, etc. The stream from underneath the threshold of the temple, water street on both sides, and their lease shall be for the healing of the nation. And Ian and I, and Catherine McPhee, our friend, who is the official archivist for the Isle of Skye and Loch House, and with another of these younger generation of scholars grasping a hold of these things. Ian, Catherine and I wrote the foreword for Niall Campbell's Gaelic poem, Agus Mar Sin Cara Mulatan. I don't have the Gaelic, I won't have pronounced that properly, but the translators and so Somersault. We wrote a foreword in which we made this very point about the cultural carrying stream, that the poets carry, about the stream from underneath the threshold of the temple. You'll find this on my website. You'll find it, the whole poetry pamphlet. It was printed by Atlas Arts and Sky in a limited edition of 100 copies, like 3-4 years ago, when we launched it. I put the PDF online, and I just want to read you a passage of that. Miles Campbell, being a Sky poet now in his 80s, I should say he's I should say that Miles is also a devout member of the Free Church of Scotland, very strong in the Presbyterian tradition, and yet he can write about being carried away by the storms like that, and comfortably do so within his tradition. And here's a passage in English translation, his own English translation from that. I'm just reading it for convenience from Ronald Black's book of 20th century Gaelic poetry here. And so I somersault into an alternate reality. And I woke up once again, this time in a boat. So this is after our hero in the story has been coming home drunk at night in his horse. And as he's passing the fairy hill, his horse bucks him. And he's away for God knows how long. A very archetypal story in the tradition. I woke up once again, this time in a boat, with a little old man sitting in the stern, and he said, "You will not be here tomorrow." "Oh, bless you," I said, as if I knew where I was or where I would be the next moment. And I laughed, but he said, "Your year is to be up. Tomorrow you will be back at home in Austin." And though I felt harassed, I looked around me, and I was on a peaceful loch, as peaceful as paradise. And there was a rainbow on the horizon above the trees, and there was a waterfall tumbling near. Here's a stream from underneath the threshold of a temple, and there was a waterfall tumbling down from high rocks, slowly, negligently, as if it were forever. And I was going to speak to the little green man, but he wasn't there. In his place was a beautiful girl. Gentle and calm was her smile, and she seemed as if she were part of the water, and I felt calm too, as if I were part of nature, natural as was nature, as was the water and the waterfall, forever falling in the same place. And this girl said, the girl was love in her eyes, "You will accept it." And I said, "I will accept what?" And she said again in the same calm voice, "You will accept it. Accept the flood, accept the calmness, accept the other world people, and accept human beings." And the blonde hair over her shoulder was gleaming. And I made a motion to touch her, made a motion to put my hand in hers, but she disappeared. And so, Somerset. Miles Campbell, the bird of Stephen, in the north sky. You read the whole thing. There's this picture in the back. So, I grew up in the Isle of Wales. And when I was 22, I applied to do volunteer service overseas, same as your Peace Corps that still exists in America. I went out to teach and to set up small-scale hydroelectric in Pakistan. And it was although coming from a Protestant background and agnostic, i.e. not knowing if there was a spirituality or not in my own background, I was posted to a Catholic mission at the time on liberation theology that liberates theology to serve the faith. Was opening up. And there I met people like Mama Miriam here, Margaret Ogumeni. I heard just this week that she died 2 years ago. Popping better than Papua people doing conscientization work, or Paulo Freire of Brazil calls conscientization, the raising of consciousness and conscience as to what kind of development do people want. If we are going to be full human beings, what kind of world do we want to live in? These people were my mentors. In entering into death, whether in our writing or in life more widely, there will be helpers. There will be guardian angels along the way. Often you may only have brief encounters with them. But as the Chinese say, when the people is ready, the teacher arrives. These people were my teachers. I learned from them that in community regeneration, you start by remembering that which has been dismembered. You move on to revisiting how the teacher could be the prophetic function. As Walter Brueggemann, you may have heard that great American theologian, just recently, Walter Brueggemann, here he is, for imagination, prophetic voices in exile, talking about what the prophets actually do. And this wonderful title, it's not quite such a good book as Hopeful Imagination, but wonderful title, Texts that Linger, Words that Explode. You know, if you want to write, hold that line in mind, texts that linger, words that explode, and helping people to revisit how the teacher could be. Because then you can retrain what is needed to bring it about. You can then do the social and political organizing necessary to bring it about. I came back on the mountain here in the south of the part of our island known as Paris. Mount Hornet was under threat. There was a multinational company wanted to turn this mountain into what would have been the biggest roadstone quarry in the world, perhaps shipping stone to as far away as America. I got involved in a deep campaign. There's an aerial photograph of the mountain. Very white rock. You can see there's a small existing quarry there, very white rock. I got involved in a campaign that, as a result of many different people's efforts, succeeded in stopping this. This is a national scenic area. It's almost like a national park, this area, which succeeded in stopping that from happening. And I was helped to do that by a Mi'kmaq war chief and sacred pipe carrier from Cape Breton Island, Sicilian Stone Eagle. It's one of the stories told in Soil and Soul, if you've read that book. And I want to give an example of something in that campaign that I call mentoring dream. How can dream mentor us? And the first thing to say there is that dream is only going to be of any help to you if you observe your dream, if you take them seriously. So whenever I have a dream, I've got a little bit of my, a memory area in my phone called dream. And I just put down the date and I summarize a dream in it. And not always, but very often, and sometimes several days later, the meaning will unfold. And I'm going to read you here from Soil and Soul an example of how in what was a deeply challenging campaign, this campaign here to save this mountain. Deeply challenging because, some people really wanted the quarry because the initial promise was it would bring 500 jobs. In fact, the government inquiry found it would only bring 35 jobs. because it'd be so mechanized. It was a very difficult campaign. But on the morning that Stone Eagle, well, here we go, chapter 20, page 224. Vivid images eddied and ebbed in blue semi-consciousness as I began to awake that November morning in 1994. Stone Eagle was flying into Glasgow in a few hours' time to participate in the Super Quarry public inquiry. But for now I was dreaming, and in the dream I'm back in the village, back in the Lurbosk of my childhood. Across the road from our house is a river. That was where Alec George Morrison, Derek McKeever, Duncan Norman MacLeod, Donald and Callum Ian Ferguson, John Newman Montgomery, Murdo MacLeod, and myself, all of us from the New Holdings area in Cameron Terrace end of the village, had gone fishing as boys. Beneath the house of Alec's uncle and aunt was an especially wide pool in the river. When we were little, around 1960, it had been dammed to power a hydraulic ram pump. That same year, 3 salmon got stuck, unable to leap the wall of the dam to reach their spawning ground. Somebody promptly speared them with a pitchfork. Never again was a noble fish to come that way. And now, in a dream this November morning, I'm standing in our house. It's a big white house that served as both my father's surgery and our home. Beside me is Ulrich Loning, my boss at the Centre for Human Ecology in Edinburgh University. With him is George Allen, Alex's uncle. George had a foster and weaver of Paris food. He and his wife Tata had always boosted me like one of their own children. But in real life, George had long since passed away. And as I'm waking up, I'm dreaming this dream. And part of me is simultaneously trying to figure it out. I'm seeing that George stands for the indigenous way of life. Ulrich, on the other hand, represents a wider world and its global concerns. And I'm just watching from the window there, standing, watching with these 2 fine men, when suddenly my son Adam comes running inside. He carries a willow basket of creel, one just like he used to have in the old days for bringing in the peats. It's full of salmon, overflowing. Dad! Dad! His little voice excitedly quivers. They've come back. The salmon are returning. We 3 men raise the binoculars so conveniently the dream has us wearing round our necks. And the lad's right. Amazingly, the stream is leaping, alive as a big silver fish returning from its epic Atlantic migration. In Celtic mythology, the salmon is a symbol of spiritual knowledge. It acquired its spots by eating the hazelnuts of wisdom. As I awaken fully, I know that later today Stone Eagle and his partner and co-worker Ishbel Monroe will be arriving in Glasgow, Scotland, having departed from New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. The link between Canada and Scotland could hardly be more graphic. Native wisdom was migrating back from across the Atlantic. Maybe this could help us to recover an ecological wisdom that had been lost. It might be too late for George's generation, for Ulrich's generation, who died just last year, and even for mine, I turned 70 just last year, but maybe not for Adam's generation. Do you see there how right at the high point, where literally as the plane would be coming into Glasgow through land, or they'd be having breakfast in that plane, probably about an hour and a half away from London. I have that dream, and how that kind of dream can carry on in challenging. I said a lot of the land is very empty. The reason for that, and the reason why you'll find people with so many Scottish and Irish names in American phone books, is substantially because people were forced off the land by the wealthy who acquired control of it. Gunboats were sent in to a number of places, including my island, the Isle of Lewis, including Skye here. Gunboats were sent in to put down unrest, and the people shipped off either to the cities of mainland Britain to be fodder for the Industrial Revolution, or to the trenches of soldiers of the Empire, or shipped off to Canada, the United States, Australia, etc. And a lot of Scottish fine art testify to the brokenness of that thought about it. To be forced out of the place of your ancestors, forced away from place where every rock, every river, every pillar had a name. The stories anchored you in who you were. Theme that is very strong in Donald and his Seven Cloud. I was mentored by Tom Forsyth here across it. The older I got, the more I look back and see how often I was mentored into greater depth than I had previously been by such people. In my essay in the book on Scottish literature, I describe the writing of what I consider to be my most beautiful books. The Soil and Soul is my most important book in terms of the influence it's had. There's Portrait Pilgrimage. That's the latest version of the British cover, the American cover, from Whiff and Stock, Cascade Books, is a different cover to that. But I was mentored in writing this, and the reason for my dedication is to Catherine McKinnon, who was an elderly woman who heard me giving a talk in Skye and started writing to me. I've got a whole box up there behind me of her letters. And if I can just read you from my essay in Scottish literature, how did Catherine do this? She started off with snail mail, then graduated onto email. So I would write to her, here we are, 26th May. Was very tired and went and slept. Woke up dreaming that you were explaining some point of Gaelic poetry to me. She replies the next day, Angus, oh my goodness, here he is. Angus Patrick Campbell's column, Donald on the 7th house, his column, goodness. I hadn't read this before reading it to you just now, so I'd forgotten I had him in there. Angus Patrick Colm in the West Highland Free Press is dynamiters group, real and serious concerns about the exploitation and colonization of Gaelic. Dreaming about Gaelic, as I have just done, is good. Remember the Hugh McNillage quote. There were things he would say in Gaelic that he could never think to say in English. As though he had a secret knowledge that only existed in Gaelic, and as though he had a secret knowledge that only existed in Gaelic, and which he could only reveal to those who trusted and knew the language. The language is key to something beyond the language. See you on Wednesday. Please don't slave over hot stove. I like simple food. And then she goes on. I booked the 11 o'clock bus down. Lorries are rumbling up and down the road, unloading stones to turn the harbour into a marina. The fisherman's mission is closing, and local folks with small boats won't be able to afford the harbour dues for the marina. See you on Wednesday. Cat. Me. I was rereading my manuscript for Portrait Pilgrimage last night and can see I'm going to have to lose most of the early parts. Too much foreshadowing of what emerges later. Also, I need to work some lightness into the text. Be good to discuss with you. I'm wrestling with whether or not there's real substance in the fairy material, or whether the wind passes and it all turns to dust, but I must set to work. I really, really enjoyed my visit to you in government. What a wonderful atmosphere there is at the Galvale Trust. Did you get any chance to talk to Finlay MacLeod of Sawbust about the themes? I've posted you the School of Scottish Studies version of the Cave of Gold story. I did quite a lot of research on this, and I'm still puzzled and intrigued. Bardic immunity is very useful. The Reverend Roddy MacLeod told me a story about a case in Lochmaddy, North West. It is about poaching, stealing the salmon, or something not too serious. The sheriff did the your name bit. You are Donald, Ian MacDonald, 3 times. No response. Till he got cross and slapped. Oh, Shawnee a bird. Won't you answer? Well, that was it. Case dismissed. Apparently, if you're proclaimed as a bird or recognized as a bird, you have bardic immunity. Do any lawyers can confirm this? Yeah. See what's going on there? There is in the tradition that a bird has a diplomatic immunity. And so there's the sheriff in the court asking Shawnee to confirm his name, as you have to do in the court of law. And Shawnee stays silent, and the sheriff, knowing the tradition, names him, oh, Shawnee a bird, oh, Shawnee, you are a bird. In other words, I've got to give you diplomatic immunity to it. You see how Cass is using that kind of story. So, you know, I mean, what stage? Commenting on things I've written, weaving it in. Now, I'm telling you this, folks, for 2 reasons. One is so that you can be aware of what people might be helping you like that and respond to it more deeply, perhaps. And secondly, especially if you grow in experience, you can understand more how to help others. That's what we really need. So why did Tom Forsyth turn up on the scene? Tom Forsyth turned up on the scene because here I was back from Papua New Guinea, influenced by these women especially and by liberation theology. And land reform was becoming a big issue, but a very blocked issue in Scotland. Huge estates owned by wealthy people, like the island of Egg here, 7,500 acres, owned by one wealthy man on the market as a result of divorce proceedings. And Tom said, why don't we buy it and bring it into community trust? Because as you can see, this is back in my Taliban days. And 4 of us, Liz Lyon, an artist, Tom in the middle there, and Bob Harris, a sheep farmer and community councillor, set up a trust, the story of which is told in Soil and Soul. I'm not going to go through it here. Through Liz's connections, we were drawn into the writing of Kenneth White, the Jew poet. He's in there, he spoke of shamanism for our time, and also Hugh McDermott, the poet. I've got, there we go. I'm working with both volumes of his poetry just now in the course of this review and writing. There's Hugh McDermott. And I'm just going to read what McDermott said about Scotland in 1939. But you think about America in 2026. Scotland's terrible to country. America's terrible to claim. There's not a dispute in the material plane. Materially, wars, resistance against. We have suffered an appalling reverse because of the incoherence of our meaning. What we need above all is a revolution in morale, a return to our roots, a rediscovery of deep realities we have neglected and the spiritual and moral obstacles that keep us from it. It is around these standards that America must rally or perish. With apologies to McDermott, if you get my point. So, to Egg, and you can get a sense in this picture of a community meeting. noticed how difficult things were for the people, with this landowner who would evict people or otherwise penalize them if they didn't go along with his whims and fancies. And see how much alcohol was needed in those days to lubricate meetings. And see how tense they were. Notice also, and this is very common and remains common, the inner circle where is women, the outer circle is men. In community methods, it tends to be in our communities, the women who really make the decisions, although it can be the men who outwardly execute them. So we formed a trust that confronted private ownership, and although we had no money, announced the intention to buy egg and bring it into community ownership, helped by market spoiling, that by saying the community announces a claim of right over its place. This would scare off private investors who were looking for a holiday home kind of scene, which succeeded in doing. And in that respect, I turn now back to soil and soul again. And I think Laura has shared with you these pages from 185 in Soil and Soul about what happened here. But I just want to quickly go over it again to say to you that at this time I had not encountered the notion of carrying stream. I was very familiar with Jung's collective unconscious, Assagioli redefining that as a superconscious, etc., but not the carrying stream. But here we are, and so I'm just going to skim this a little bit because you probably already read it, but Mary Kirk feeds Tom, Bob and I, and we get into a little red Land Rover, cross the island to the public meeting. And all around you can see cars converging towards the tea room where the meeting is going to be held. To the West Atlantic thunders, Mary releases the handbrake and the vehicle rolls down the hill past the house and they bump start with a jerk because all of the eggs, all of the cars on egg were absolutely knackered. You wouldn't be allowed to drive them on the mainland, but on this little island, things will survive forever. And of course, none of them would start in the normal way. Just as we're passing the highest spot in the middle of Egg, just before the road drops down through the hazel root. Now notice what I'm channeling there. The road does drop down to an ancient hazel root. But what I'm channeling there is youths and the song of the wandering Angus. I went down to the hazel root because a fire was in my head and cut and peeled a hazel wand and took the berry to the thread. And the youth goes into the realm of the woman with silver apples, with apple blossom in her hair, the golden, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples or something like that. I've got a very bad memory for things, but I'm basically channeling that while at the same time describing the real situation in my literary method here. Just as the road drops down through the hazel wood, I'm crouched on the floor, uncomfortably bouncing about in the back, and I start to become aware that a river is flowing into me. A river. It feels like all the ancient blocked up wells and springs are broken free. They're merging and melding, and the confluence is a torrential, silvery stream of light. I'm bathed, soothed, inwardly illuminated. Well, just prior to this, I was the next best thing to a nervous wreck. I was going to have to face the community and give account for it, and a frightened community, and a community that was frightened of us because of what we might stir up and the trouble it could cause. I become aware of what the stream is composed of, voices, a vast chorus of them. They're literally flowing out from the rocks and soil. They're coming from all around the highlands. The earth, the ground itself is their source. These are the voices of the old people. The dead are with us. Dry bones have come back to life. Notice I'm channeling Ezekiel and his dry bones coming to life. The strange experience lasted about a minute. It faded as we came down through the wood onto the other side of the island. I said nothing to the others, but as we walked into the tea room that night, I felt swept along by an unstoppable confidence, an unshakable knowledge that what we were doing was right, an entreaty to put aside self-doubt. It felt like we were carrying what a voice in my mind called the mantle of Scottish history. As they say in the movies, the force is with us. All we had to do was follow the shaft of light, follow the voices, flow with the woo wave, walk with the silver fairy path. In this I was not my own. In this, nevertheless, I was most deeply and joyfully rooted in myself. Tom, Bob, and I were warmly welcomed into the tea room. People were excited. Children were playing under the tables, dogs were yapping, and what appeared to be the entire population of egg, from babies to octogenarians, sat crammed on chairs or piled up in corners. As I got up to speak, a threefold approach to community empowerment came together in my head. It was straight out of liberation theology, a direct application of Paulo Freire's concentration, that unity of consciousness and conscience that enables us to analyze and act upon the causes of oppression. What can we do in Scotland about landlordism? I asked. First, I suggest we must remember. We must remember the way that those erecting the cairns in Noida at the site of land grabs and Lewis, etc., etc. Then we can engage in revisioning. We must envision what our communities could become, sorting out the realistic from the fantasy, and asking what kind of a people we want to be. Are our values primarily those of market forces, or do we stand for values to do with place, culture, and relationship? Finally, dare we reclaim? Can we, as in the words communicated by Moses in Leviticus 25, proclaim the liberation of all the inhabitants of the land, a jubilee for you? Each of you will return to his ancestral home. Land must not be sold in perpetuity, for the land belongs to me. Well, I'm told now notice here I knock myself off the perch. Very important. Don't take yourself too seriously. Well, I'm told I used too many big words. I'm told that the theology went over the heads of many and rubbed one or two up the wrong way, though significantly, not the old people. But it was the atmosphere that was the real talking that night. As we left the meeting, one of the most elderly Indigenous women came up and fixed my eyes with her. She spoke deliberately, choking out each syllable. She said of Pete Schellenberg, the landlord, just help us to get rid of that man. During the following week, the Isle of Egg Residents Association held a secret ballot. There was 100% turnout. A stunning 73% voted in favour of the Trust's continued advocacy on their behalf. No longer could we be accused of not having a mandate. So Schellenberg then responded by moving to evict islanders. We got into the front pages of the news. We launched an appeal to start raising money, even though he said he wouldn't sell to us. Our newspapers declared it a Scottish land rights revolution that was happening here. And finally, to cut a long story short, and with the help of a millionaire who gave us $1 million towards the knockdown price of 1.6 million, originally valued at 3 million. Finally, we raised 1.6 million with 10,000 donations from around the world. It was international news, followed by the Land Reform Scotland Bill, and there are now some 500 land trusts in Scotland, about to hit 3% of Scotland's land area under community democratic tenure. Now, Tom mentored in many ways, I led the early days of the Egg Trust. I had the credibility of an academic at Edinburgh University, but Tom mentored me in the process, helped Bob and indeed Liz also, as we'll see, for the reasons I don't need to go into here. She let go of the trust. Actually, her former husband was married. Her former husband was married to Schellenberg's ex-wife, so it got a bit tangled, as you might imagine. But in many ways, I was mentored by these people. And I want to address now, how do you do mentoring if you're in a position to do so? And I think all of us can be in that position in today's world. So I live in a hard-pressed area of Glasgow. I'm one of the founders of an organization called the Galgale Trust. And I arrange for our people, many of whom have got issues, long-term unemployment, mental health issues, problems with the law, addictions to both drugs and alcohol, etc. I arrange for our folks to go up to Iona to volunteer at the Abbey, that kind of thing. I also take them out mackerel fishing in my canoe. And of course, they've got their own boats at the Galgale that they go rowing and sailing in. So one of the ways we do it is we put on parties. Now, it's easy to put on a party. It can be a bring and share. It can be focused around the book or listening to a piece of music or a discussion speech. So that's the one we just had. There were 15 of us at Christmas in our house there. There's our house in Glasgow. That is our neighborhood. We have a nice house in a poor area, as you can see. That house has now been done up, but you can see how it was until recently. Here's our workshop, boat building, people learning woodworking skills. And underlying it, the question of how do all of us heal from that which burdens us? Sinead O'Connor here, if there's ever going to be healing, there has to be remembrance so that there can be forgiven. There has to be knowledge and understanding. I have a good friend in Minnesota just now who's very involved helping people who are being persecuted. Good friend John, and we've been discussing, in fact, next month I'm going to do a session with this church looking at what does it mean to love your enemy? How can you confront those who do terrible things? And yet, as Raymond Hanecker, the great Christian Hindu theologian, put it, only forgiveness breaks the law of karma. How can we do this work without, as my late friend, the theologian Walter Wink put it, taking on the likeness of the beast? Because if we respond to faith with faith, we take on the likeness of the beast and we start to lose faith. There has to be knowledge and understanding. And so this was just literally last night, as you can see at our house. We put on another one, this one for colleagues at the Centre for Human Ecology, a Burns supper, celebrating the birthday of our national bard, Robert Burns. So there we are with a haggis. There's a knife stuck into it, as Luke is reading the ode to the haggis. And there we are, all toasting the immortal memory with a good dram of whiskey. Young Tara, who comes mackerel fishing with me, playing with the floor there with her parents. But with that, a very serious purpose. It was highly focused because we set a theme, a discussion where we're at and what's called for from us. A time to reflect and discern in the dark time of the year. Now, I only ever got 19% in school art. And as you can see, my artistic skills have come on wonderfully, but I'm going to keep it a secret as to how I created that poster. It's a copyright of mine. But you see my point, how you can do this kind of thing. We even have, carriages at 9:30. In other words, we're going to kick you all out at 9:30. Set very clear parameters. Arrive at 5, for supper at 6, followed by a discussion, and we kept to that timetable, although I do admit that I managed to persuade my wife to allow me to extend the history club for a little bit longer after most of them had left. And a good time was had by all. Now, I want to move on now to your vice president. Oh, I want to move on to your vice president here, and his book that's on the shelf behind me. And I want to read you this from the introduction compiled from the introduction. The man said that he does not identify with the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in the Northeast. Instead, I identify with the millions of working-class white Americans of Scots-Irish descent, you know who we're talking about, whose ancestors were day laborers in the southern slave economy. In other words, they were the poor whites kicked off their own land, and they arrived in America, and they can either join the military and go and kill Native Americans, or they can join the plantations and wield the lash over people of African descent who are not there by their free will. Nevertheless, love your enemy, take them where they stand. Americans call them hillbillies, redneck, the white folk. I call them neighbors, friends, and family. And this is where it's a really interesting bit. If only he would apply this instead of having seemingly sold out. But we're more socially isolated than ever. And we pass our isolation down to our children. Our religion is changed, built around churches, heavy on emotional rhetoric. Our men suffer from a peculiar crisis of masculinity, reacting to bad circumstances in the worst way possible. There is a lack of agency here. The fact that hillbillies like me are more down about the future than many other groups suggests something else is going on. And I put it to you, you or I cannot reach out to them so come if we might feel inclined to. But I put it to you that what Vance here called the spiritual and material poverty is what we can reach out to. That's what we can share with our neighbors across the garden fence. And so back to my own village. As children, we used to play in these ruins. We never knew why they were ruins. We never knew why the place was so empty on this side of the long arm of the sea loch. We used to gather shelters in this bay. And now I take people from West Papua here, meeting with our village women here, with Evelyn Cool MacLeod and Catherine Mary McLean there. We've gathered shellfish, we've gathered mussels, and we're cooking them up in this pot. The Papuans are blown away that we too are indigenous to our place. And we sit there with people like my friend Rusty. In Evelyn's house is a picture of her husband at the gathering shaking hands with, or somebody who's in the picture is shaking hands with Donald Trump at one of these Scottish golf courses. Rusty here is descended on the Smith side from Trump's ancestors. What happened? What happened? Why have the beautiful values of these people not been carried forward in America? That's what we're discussing there. And the reason is that the people were evicted by the landlords. Trump's people were evicted in 1826. And then the people forced into poverty, very little land. And then given the chance, Mary Ann McLeod set sail at the age of 17. She arrived just after her 18th birthday in 1930. There's a genealogy, there's a Smith line that I was talking about here. And she meets Frederick Price Pump. And some people leave the island, but the island never leaves them. They are always islanders. And other people, particularly if they get involved in doing bad things, cut themselves off, they cut the umbilical cord, to forget their roots and values. And the more you become an oppressor, the more you oppress, and the more you have to oppress to remain the oppressor. But look at her backdrop. Her family were evicted in the 1820s clearances that emptied much of the south of the Isle of Man. They were afflicted by multiple mass drownings in the area they were moved to because the sea was so exposed in broad bay. In World War One, when she was a child, 1 in 6 young men on the island died, and the Alastair disaster took out another 200. And a ship hit rocks, bringing naval ratings back to the island, and over 200 of them perished. Who was going to be left to marry in such a depleted island? On top of which, you had the Spanish flu and the tuberculosis and the mass emigration in the 1920s, where 4 out of 5, roughly, were young men going to America to look for a better life. That is the backdrop, the trauma backdrop to that family. There she is, a rich, elderly woman. There he is when he came back to the Isle of Lewis to meet with his relatives, really good, respected people in the community. He spent 90 seconds inside their house. All he wanted was a photograph. That's his sister there. She's well liked. She hasn't forgotten her island roots. He's a different matter. And so the Papuans say, we've seen that people here have 2 things that makes their community grow: love and a sense of ownership. The land in Papua is more productive, but because these people love so much, it holds it all together. They're happy to live for other people and not for themselves. They understand that land is God's food. So folks, that is where I am coming from, and the kind of work that I do. That is what not just informs my writing, but drives my writing. It's a reason why I write. When I write, it helps me to understand what I'm doing. It helps to make sense of what I feel called to do, because when you're working from a sense of calling, you often don't realize what you're doing when you're doing it. And it's only later that the patterns fall into place. Remember that poem that I began with from Kenneth White: for the question is always how, out of all the chances and changes, to select the features of real significance, just to make of the welter a world that will last, and how to order the signs and the symbols so that they will continue to form new patterns, developing into new harmonic wholes, so to keep life alive in complexity and complicity with all of being. There is only portrait. There we have it. Thank you for listening. Please don't feel, Laura said that we had plenty of time and that I didn't need to hurry. So I've taken plenty of time on that basis, but please don't feel you need to stay. If you need to leave, do leave. And if it is being recorded, we can catch up with a discussion later. But I'm very happy to stay and hear from you.
Thank you so much, Alastair. Let's unmute, and if you have a question you'd like to ask, or an observation or an experience with your own mentorship by person or dream and other sources of wisdom and creativity, anything at all. Alastair's a wonderful teacher and will engage at every point.
Well, Laura, I don't have a question, but I do want to say, Alastair, I was very struck as you were speaking about regeneration, and that first step being remembering that which has been dismembered. And immediately I just came back to the US. You know, I was there before you mentioned our vice president and our president. I was with you. It seems to me that this is, I don't even know if there's a point in saying this, but we're still coming apart at the seams, and we're still dismembering one another and ourselves. And I don't think I don't see that stopping anytime soon, but I can say that there's been a small group, I think it's 18 now, Buddhist monks who've been traveling across the United States.
Yes, we've been reading about them here.
And we have been we are so taken with them. And I think it's because we're so starved, because we no longer remember. You know, we don't know where we come from. We've lost wisdom. We've lost indigeneity in every respect. So they came through my town and I had the opportunity to show up early one morning and to be present as they walked through. And it just strikes me listening to you that I think two things. One is the only way out is to remember who we are to one another. And then the other thing is I think that it's going to be a long time. I think it has to become worse. And I think there's an experiment, and Laura, you may know it, and Dale, you may know it, but it's the bowling ball pendulum experiment. And the bowling balls in a line are set into motion and they swing together.
Oh, yes.
Then it forms kind of a lazy S, and then
Right.
they're all over the place, and then there's absolute chaos, and then it comes back together. But we're not close enough to chaos yet. And I know that we don't have to wait, because I just think what's happening here is so awful, and it affects the world, and the world rightly kind of doesn't like us right now. And I think that that's fair. But I do think that we have the opportunity through this kind of conversation simply to remember who we are and who we are to one another. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And on the Trump and Vance thing, I think the important thing is not Trump or Vance as individuals. The important thing is the constituency we represent, the MAGA, the often Scots American self-identifying. And what's important, and what I try to do in my work, and that's substantially what I do in Porter's pilgrimage here, is trying to understand that historical backdrop and how trauma plays out so often by the oppressed becoming the oppressor. And that's why I said to Laura, when Laura had me speak at Asheville Word Fest, I said, Laura, if I'm back in America speaking again, another time, whoever invites me, I'm going to tell them I don't want to just speak in the university. I don't want to just speak in the bookshops where middle class people go. I want to, I want my hosts to take me down to the trailer park, and I want to talk with the people that more affluent people call white trash, because that's where the calling would be. That was where the calling would be, and that's where it's so important to understand the drivers of the kind of politics that we see in place, where some people turn to violence, the racism, the prejudice, and so on. We need to understand where that's coming from. And of course, that is often not a popular thing to say. It's not popular to say that in many activist circles, because they thrive on generating a sense of anger in order to drive the activism. And I can see the point in that. I can see the justification in it. And yet at the same time, my theology is one that says, try to love your enemy. Don't deny your enemy. Don't deny that there is a very real issue here. Don't hold back from confronting. Don't hold back. Walter Wink, the theologian I mentioned, he had the trilogy is most important one. The one he told me it's the one that he would always recommend people do first. His trilogy is naming the powers, unmasking the powers, and engaging the powers that be. And this is the one I reckon you could just buy this one. That's probably the third one in the trilogy. There's Walter. There, he died about 10 years ago. Walter talks about we need the courage to name it. Don't shy from naming it. Just take courage to name it. Just take courage to take your neighbor. And, I have a real problem with where you're coming from on this. And yet at the same time, put your neighbor's garbage bin out or help them pull their boat up or whatever. And, if I was driving on a highway in America in a snowstorm like we've got just now in some parts and my car broke down, I think I would rather see a redneck MAGA voter coming along in a utility truck than see a university liberal sailing by. If you know what I mean. And you see how that, you're all laughing. We're all laughing about it. see how a joke like that can just lead to things. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think a good many of us are already, you're speaking to some of the choir here and people from this part of the country and who come from those same backgrounds. Those are my people you're talking about as well. And I think that part of what we do when we're speaking seriously or in anger here is that we allow the situation to be set up in extremes, which it's not actually real, but it is
Yeah.
because we're given it power.
Yeah. And we saw after Helene just how much unity there is. And nobody was asking, what's your political party when they were handing diapers from the back of a pickup truck. We saw the tie-dyes and the Trump supporters doing amazing things. And this is what gives me hope. There was something mysterious about that. There was no central organizing body. We didn't have internet. We didn't know, but everyone showed up by instinct almost, right? Like to me, it was a sign of how the lion lies down with the lamb. First, there has to be trauma. And then it was our natural trauma response after that hurricane was to help. And I wonder, I wish I could buy a billboard and say, what happened after Helene? And can we do that again? You know?
Mm. Todd, my former student, who's no longer on this call now, probably caught up with his family now. I mean, he's heard me so many times before he doesn't need to any longer. But after he had me at the Astral Word First, he took me down to the College of Charleston, is it? That College of Charleston, I think.
Charleston? I'm sorry?
Have I
Yeah.
got that right? Anyhow, he took me to a college. He took me to his town in South Carolina, and he took me out to a place called McLeod Plantation, which was a slave plantation owned by a Scottish family called McLeod that's been turned into a pizza. And he introduced me to African Americans who were colleagues of his. We had some wonderful connections. And that's how you do it, folks. But you you have to make a point of making friends with these folks. And you only do that by standing in solidarity with them. And I found that very moving. There was a guy, I think I can get his name right. I think that's a business called. Okay. Um, Adi of Fanning, OFENNIYIN. He's head of something called the Dura Society, which probably means something to folks who were academic. And he put on an exhibition in the local art gallery about awareness of Black issues. It's called Woke. And in it was representations of lynching, including nooses hanging down. And at one point, I went and put my head in one of the nooses as if I was the one that hanged. And he almost broke into tears and he just came over and hugged me. That sense of solidarity. I said to him, what can we white people do? He said, listen to your ancestors. Well, who are your ancestors? I just told you the story on Mr. Hunt's ancestors. Listen to your ancestors.
I had a question in your the
It was
forward.
Charleston. It's College of Charleston in South Carolina. Does
Yeah.
that make sense? You
Yeah,
got me
that
now.
was it.
Yeah.
Tad has a question now. or a comment.
Yeah, please
Yeah.
go,
Yeah,
please go. Please.
yeah, I
Sorry,
was
did
just
I
gonna,
cut into something?
uh,
Sorry, Ted. Ted, I momentarily switched on to Google just
oh,
to get the name right, and I cut across.
no, that's fine. I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but I was curious about something. The foreword to your book, The Soul and Soil. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. George Montbiot had mentioned something and
Yeah.
compared you and to Alice Miller being sort of the first step in something he called decolonization of the soul. I was wondering if, number one, was Alice Miller an influencer of yours in any way? And also, could you just speak a little bit about that concept of decolonization of the soul?
Yeah. I don't think Alice Miller talked about decolonization of the soul, but her work has been a big influence on me. And I was introduced to that work by Tom Forsyth. When I spoke about Tom being my mentor, was the egg community land buyout campaign. What I mean by Tom being a mentor was in a very holistic way. He would come in. There's one book he brought in, Conrad Steckbacher, Making Sense of Suffering. In fact, I think the foreword to it was by Alice Miller. So it was around that time that I encountered Alice Miller's book on For Your Own Good, For Your Own Good, The Origins of Violence in Child Rearing. I think it had a different subtitle in America, but that was the subtitle in English. And she profiles members of the Third Reich and mass killers and looks at what that's a humiliation basically you experienced in childhood, how the soul was totally oppressed and suppressed in childhood. And to me, that is at the root of colonization. I talk in my work about the three eyes of imperialism. Three eyes. There is, oh God, I'm not going to be able to remember what they are now. There's basically territorial colonialism, and then there's oh gosh, and then there's what's called internal colonization. Yeah, that's right, imperial. First eye, imperial colonization, when one country takes over another. And then there's what the sociologists call internal colonization, which is basically when a powerful part of a country exploits a resource-rich or labor-rich but poor part of a country. So you have an imbalance within a given country. But then I say the bit that's not recognized is inner colonization, the way in which we are colonized psychologically and spiritually. So we don't even realize that we are being the oppressor. And that's what I mean by inner decolonization. That's what I mean by decolonization of the soul. And that is where, to understand that, you need the work of people like Alice Miller or James Gilligan, who used to run the Massachusetts prison service, who is married to Carol Gilligan, who some of you will know from her book In a Different Voice, about how young women lose and then perhaps find their voices. Again, it's another face of colonization, that question of how we lose our voices, how we find them. And a lot of what you'll be doing, I know a lot of what Laura will be doing with you in creative writing class will be helping you to find your voice. And that, you maybe think you come along learning about writing technique. And I would imagine Laura will say to you, well, technique is only the outward form of things. What's really important is the inner form. And that cannot be separated from your psychological and spiritual development. And then that gets edgy in university terms, because you've got to have, boundaries, students, staff, boundaries on these things. Laura or Dale will not be there to be your therapists. But what I used to say to my students is, I cannot be or cannot offer to take on being your therapist. I'm here to teach the material and to grade your work. etc., in a supportive context. But I am aware that the issue that I open up will point you towards a need to do your own, or may point you towards a need to engage in your own inner work. And I can only say I give you every encouragement in doing that. It's just that I can't be the one that does that too intimately.
Yes. And what I have seen in teaching writing for 30 years is if a student can connect with the carrying stream, if they can write something without judgment, without fear of it being squashed, everything changes for that student. I see it with the doctors and the surgeons who've been destroyed by the pandemic. They start writing and they become alive again. I've seen it with you all. You've had that one piece that you wrote that changed. Maybe it gave you courage. Maybe it there's a ghost in the throat is a Irish saying, and we just have to get rid of that ghost in the throat. I think that ghost is often the colony and the British. It's the crown, and it's amazing what happens. And I have about 40 undergraduate students doing writing and healing right now, and I just read their first week's work, and there are a number that speak about a voice that they hear when they're working out, or a lot of them are athletes, almost all of them, and they hear it when they're writing their poetry, and they mention it, and I'm fascinated with that. We aren't so far away that we can't reattach to that carrying stream, but we do need the right kind of environment in which to do it.
You make me think of a very important point here, because I know that you work with quite a few people in the medical profession, and my mother was a nurse, and my father was a doctor. That's the context I'm coming out of. But one of the things I found very interesting down the years, my father died in 1986. He smoked 60 a day and died of lung cancer when he was 62. But so often I meet his former patients who in a quiet moment will tell me what he did to them. And very often he did it by writing letters. They will tell me of a beautiful letter that he wrote when their cancer was diagnosed, or when they lost their mother or their child, or something like that. And then a beautiful cat appeared with Pansy. Hello, pussycat. My cat,
Beautiful.
I think wherein my wife must be home, otherwise our cat would be on my knees here. Oh, what a beautiful face that cat. What American. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Anyhow, the relevance here is I always give a bit of a health warning with my work because I've had the good fortune of some of my campaigns being outwardly successful. When I talk about it, people can say, well, that's amazing, but I'm never going to be able to do that kind of thing. And that's probably true of many people. You're not going to be in that same position that is what you're called into. But then think of somebody like my father, who's an ordinary country doctor. And yet, decades later, people will talk about the letters that he wrote to them. And that is creative writing. That is writing in the aid of healing. And he'll be doing that not just with his patients, but with his professional colleagues and so on. He used to say that he didn't like serving on committees, but he had to do it. Otherwise, God knows who would get on and what mayhem they might create. And in the course of that, whether by letter or by telephone, or these days it would be email, of course, we'll be doing that. Most of my time these days is taken up giving thoughtful responses to people by email. And part of me thinks this is crazy. I spent an hour and a half on this email to somebody. So, I will be typically maybe 2-3 times a day. A lot of my day is taken up with careful email. And I'll be changing words. I'll be remembering Tom Forsyth. And Tom Forsyth once picked me up. He said, be more careful in the words you are choosing to say. And I said, well, that doesn't really matter, does it? I said, as long as the spirit behind it is okay. And he said, no, Alastair, the words you use are really important. And it took me some years. Would you believe it? It took me some years to take that on. And in fact, just this morning, I'm looking because I've got his photographs on the wall up there, pictured on the Isle of Egg. And is that in focus on the screen?
We're seeing the hair, but not the face.
Oh,
So lift it up a bit.
Taking off my own, self view back on because I can
Lift it up again. Lift it higher.
There we go.
There we go. Wow, there we go. Thank you.
Below what we call the finger of God on the Isle of Egg. That is off pinnacle. Yeah.
Wow.
Tom would pick me up on that. And here we are. I mean, he died about, 10 years ago when he was in his 80s. And still, even literally this morning, I reword something because I remember that single occasion. Can you still hear me? Can you still hear me okay? Yeah.
I can hear you, yes.
I'm trying to get this picture back on the I remember that single occasion, and he probably said it to me several times, but, often you'll say something to people several times, and then there'll be one occasion that for some reason sticks. That's mentoring. That's mentoring. And so observe when these things happen to you and recognize when and where it might be appropriate for you to provide that service to others. Would be my suggestion. Anybody else like to share thought, question, response, experience? Going. Almost last chance. Anybody else?
Just thank you,
Jenny,
for sharing so much of yourself.
Yeah. Jenny, did you raise your hand?
That's Alicia. Come in.
Hi.
Yes.
Alicia. Oh, my goodness. That is Professor Alicia Mills, formerly of the College of the Atlantic and then Antwerp.
Wonderful.
Who you will read about in Soil and Soul, because she was present the day that the super quarry magnate turned up. And Alicia, were you listening into this incognito?
Yes.
Have you been here all along?
Yes. I was
excellent.
I was just
Alicia mentored me at that. So Alicia, please speak. Please introduce yourself and share. I saw a number, but I didn't know it was you.
Right. Well, what does it mean to mentor? I think the first thing is to listen. I had one student who said to me, sometimes I just wanted a quick answer, but no, you had to find that place in my soul that really was the reason why I was asking the question. And that's so I think the most important thing is in terms of mentoring is to listen to where the person is and what the specific things are that they might need, and then do your best to address that. And then the other thing is just consistency. Alastair and I spent a lot of time sitting at the Center for Human Ecology talking about what was going on in Harris. I was there for the super quarry issue. I was there 3 to 6 months a year for about 6 years. Most of the time I spent on Harris with the McDonald family, and then but then I would go back and forth into Edinburgh. And so, Alastair, I think you were mentoring me about the culture, which is very dense and unique, and I was moving in it, and I was mentoring you about the larger academic framework about what was going on at that point. So that was a mutual thing. Anyway, I think mentoring is one of the most important things we can do, all of us.
Beautiful.
I
I'm so
think,
glad you're here.
Ginny, did you have a question, Ginny?
It's not that serious if we've gone in a different direction.
That's okay.
No, let's hear it, Jenny.
Well, Alastair, you're one of the few people in the world who has really enacted lasting social change in a tangible way from a grassroots movement, which I think is incredible. And as you say, the carrying stream is a big part of that. I wonder, I don't exactly know how to put it into words, but the collective social unconscious and the things we all have in common, do you think that that extends to the people or the systems or the bureaucracies that make these rules that need to be overturned, like the landlordism and things? Like, are you, not you, but like the collective you, are we reaching those things, those entities, or is it all about the rest of us?
It's such an uncomfortable question that.
Sorry, I do that.
It's
I
such an
don't mean to.
uncomfortable question because I think it faces up with the reality that mostly our power is very small. I sometimes find myself saying to fellow activists, and I've written a lot about activism. One of my books is called Spiritual Activism. I sometimes find myself saying to fellow activists who think, we're going to go out and change the world. I sometimes say to them, remember, though, you are only 1/8 billionth of a vote.
Right.
And that's very humbling. At the same time, the bardic and or prophetic function is to tweak the whiskers of the king. The poetic voice can sometimes break through in the way that we saw Mark Carney do just the other week. And I should say that what I'm saying today, I am aware that some of you here might be Republican voters. Some of you here might think that there is good reason behind what Trump is doing. Nevertheless, the principle of how can we do this, where yes, we have the courage to speak in the kind of way Tani spoke the other day, and yet we don't seek to destroy our enemy. As Walter Wingfoot said, we seek to call our enemy back to their higher God-given vocation. For me, this is where this work becomes profoundly spiritual. Liberation theology is theology and applied spirituality that liberates theology to do what it is meant to be doing. And in my work, and Alicia very much encouraged me with this, with the Super Quarry campaign, I have very actively used theology in legitimizing what it was that we were doing, in empowering communities, in not destroying nature just to drive more consumers. For those days when Alicia was attached as a visiting fellow to the Centre for Human Ecology then at Edinburgh University, and as she said, she had spent quite a bit of time up in Paris as part of her academic work, kind of documenting what was going on, but also being deeply supportive of some of the indigenous people there, because the understanding of indigenous people and people of color in America was kind of what we were actually needing in our community at that time. This was all part of it. I mean, you'll notice when I introduced the Super Quarry story, I said something to the effect of I'm going to tell you my part in what was, you know, a campaign that many different people played a role in. Many different people played a role in that, and because I've written about it, my part tends to get the recognition, but there's a lot more going on as well. Same as the land reform. Jenny, does that answer your question? Come back on me. There's more to it.
I think so. I think that the answer that you're giving is essentially yes, we do need to connect with the systems we're trying to overturn because they are people too, and they are part of it.
And this is where
You've got to remember that
storytelling, sorry, Alastair.
the powerful people are in power in democracy because they've been voted in. And yes, we can say, well, your democracy is corrupt, gerrymandering, the power of the press, and all the rest of it. All of these things are true. But at the end of the day, it is you, me, and our next door neighbor who puts that mark on the ballot paper. And we may not be able to influence the press baron or the politician who does the gerrymandering, but we can have that conversation across the garden fence with our neighbor. And so we do need humility, with the egg in the house super quarry containers. Alicia will remember. I used to disappoint people slightly because they would say to me, well, you know, are you going to succeed with egg? And how's the super quarry going? And I would shake my head dismally and say, 5% chance of success. And it's, you know, they would see that as a huge deflation. And I would say, we've got to be realistic. For something like this, we have a very small chance of success. Well, it so happened that both of those came up trumps on the 5% lottery. Each of them a 1 in 20 chance. 1 in 20 price is 1 in 400 chance of that coming up. I hate to be lucky. But I wouldn't have got there if I'd gone into it with an arrogance of thinking we're going to do this one, we're going to pull this one off. I got there because I followed what the calling was, and I was supported in following that calling by people like Alicia, who was just popped in with my. I emailed about half a dozen people just before we started and said, "This is on," and Laura has said it's okay for friends to join. I saw Todd was the only one there. I didn't know Alicia was there, but you know, I'd emailed people, and Alicia was one of those people. Who was one of the who was supporting me in that work, encouraging me in that work, especially on the theology side. I mean, you were living with an indigenous family, a retired policeman and his wife, and you could see in a way that most other people couldn't see the relevance of bringing theology into that debate in that community in terms of how to influence
That's right.
and encourage community gatekeepers like Norman MacLeod and Norman MacDonald and Morag Monroe, the councillor, etc.
And yes, I mean there's such a tight-knit community, and they and at first such a sharp division, but of opinion about whether to have the quarry or not. But everyone would come to Norman's house to talk with me about the quarry. Do you think there'd be more work for me and my coal company if the quarry came? Do you know? And so it was like, keeping that fluid, keeping it open, Jenny, I think was really important. Being able to talk with everyone was crucial, but also to see what the strengths and qualities were of different people, and we did three of us were meeting in the lobby during the hearings, and there was a woman, Morag Monroe, who we created this, sort of like, here's the line of cross-examination during lunch. And Morag was, a local person, and she had this like very, very fine, ferocious streak to her, and she did a tell her that, Alastair. But she did this most fabulous cross-examination, and the chief reporter saw us in the hallway, but she came up to me afterward and she said, that was the finest cross-examination I've ever seen. And which is not the kind of thing she would have done, but it was seeing what Morag's strength was and moving with it, and being very honest with the people who were pro-quarry. What would be the advantages to them, and having those conversations at will. So yeah, there was a way in which you work with the system. Going to, I would go to church services with them. On Sunday, there were like 3-hour services, but there were a whole bunch of people that I would meet there and have those conversations with them. So it was just to complete immersion was important.
Well, this has been amazing. It looks like it is 5:58 on our side of the ocean, which means, goodness gracious, Alastair, it's late where you are. Thank you.
Our cat has just turned up and is telling you it's time to get off the computer.
It is.
You are being neglectful of me and neglectful of your wife.
Well, tell Varen that we send our best.
And if you don't watch out, we're going to tell them the truth.
There we go.
Plus, you've not eaten yet.
Thank you so much.
Go well, folks.
So
Thank you, Laura,
much.
for holding the space. Alicia, it was so wonderful that you
Lovely to meet you.
were in the background there.
Yeah. Thank you, Alastair.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Have a lovely night. Give Varen my best. And
I will.
Yes.
Yep.
And to the friends at Galdale Trust.
I'll tell Varen that you all delayed me long beyond what I thought was reasonable.
I will. Yeah. I will carry that.
Go well. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.